Spiritual awakening means that you're creating your own connection to your own power source. And you want to be connected to others who think similarly. Because there's a lot of people out there that don't think like you do, and they want to judge, or they want to say, oh, you're crazy. Why are you thinking that? And I usually say to people, if they say that to me, well, how do I know you're not crazy? Just because you say it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. And just because you think that I shouldn't think like you doesn't mean that I'm wrong. This goes two ways. And many people who step into the spiritual self are hesitant because they're concerned about judgment, or they're concerned about family not supporting them. And the reality is that if you're starting this journey into awakening your spiritual self, that's being the true authentic you. And many people around you are not living in their authentic self. And you want to be able to be around more people that want to be more authentic. Today I'm going to talk about what is intuition, and are you intuitive? Do you believe that you're intuitive, or do you believe you're beyond even intuitive and you can go into higher levels of your intuitive self? So really today what I'd like to be able to share with all of you is that we're really sort of in search of our own inner wisdom. And a lot of this is about opening our hearts and opening our minds and opening just our own, what I call, vibrational energy. And so we're going to talk more and more about what is intuition, what does it mean, where does it come from? And then we'll talk a little bit about the difference between intuition and then what people call psychic abilities. And honestly, there is no difference. There is a difference between what we call gut feeling and intuition, and then what we call psychic ability. So really it's more of gut feelings, or more of what we call built-in, just sort of a built-in instinct somewhat. Whereas then you can move to intuitive energy, and then that can move you into a deeper level, of which a lot of people call psychic energy. And I've always found it interesting that the term psychic for a lot of people is like, ew, that's scary. I don't know if I want a psychic insight, because you're going to tell me something negative. And that's not always true. In fact, it's rarely true. But the interesting thing is then we have words like psychology and, parapsychology or psychiatry and those words, but those, well, they might scare some people, but basically those are more what we call academic words. But yet they are based on the same word. They're based on the same information. And psychology is all about understanding yourself and digging deep within what's going on in your inner self. And yet, when we talk about psychic abilities, people are not as comfortable with that. But yet, what that means is that it's still about going within the psyche, to go within ourselves and to be able to understand what's going on. But what I also know, and I want to take you back just a little bit, is that we are, as far as my beliefs go, we are energetic light beings. We vibrate. We have a vibration. And the world vibrates. And there's a universal and a cosmic vibration. And we actually, as human beings, vibrate with that cosmic energy. And right now, if you believe a lot about what's going on in the world, and that, we're coming into a time where energy is shifting, energy is to a certain extent moving upward. We're moving upward with that energy. And if you feel that and know that and believe that, the higher your energy resonates, the more connected you are. The more connected to your own self, your own spirit, and your own being. So what's really important to know about yourself as an energetic being is that by being that energetic person, you are bringing what we call light energy to others. You're allowing yourself to actually be more energetic and to be able to shine more light on others and to also be more connected to yourself. So, if we embrace that idea that we are energetic light beings, the more that we work on developing our intuition, the more we will develop our connection to that vibration and that resonation that we can feel. So, what does it mean to be intuitive? Well, first of all, you're born with the ability of intuition. And it's not something, now a lot of people call it a gift, and I used to call it a gift. I don't really call it a gift anymore because I know that it's already programmed within us. But I do believe that the ability to expand and to use your intuition and then to really take it to a much higher level, to me, then that becomes the gift. The gift of being able to cultivate the energy within you and then to be able to take it to a level that you can serve others. And there's many ways that everyone can be served by their own intuition and by the intuition of others helping or working with them. And what it's described as, for most people, is that it's the ability to understand or know something without conscious reasoning. It's also a direct perception of truth, which is very important. And it's one of the many spiritual ways that when we talk about spirit or guides or energy or God or higher power, however you use that term, it's one of the ways that we connect to that higher power. And in connecting to that higher power can help us begin to serve the purpose or our purpose of why we came here. I mean, how many of you think or believe that you have a purpose on this earth right now? That you have a purpose, that there's some reason that you came here? Okay, good. And how many of you feel like you've never found that purpose, or that you think you're on track, but you're like, I'm still not sure what my purpose is? And what I'd like to say is that knowing your purpose and living fully your purpose is not always a conscious thing. It's not always that important to know exactly what your purpose is, because many people who have brought what I would call profound purpose to the world through them were just very simple individuals who really didn't think about what their purpose was. They just did it. They just lived it. They didn't have to sit down and make a plan and set intentions and ask over and over, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? Sometimes we just become our purpose. Excuse me. So I want you to sort of move the idea of what your purpose is, move it over to the side a little bit. And just ask yourself, so what happens within me? What information do I get? What kind of intuition comes from me? Now, in my experience, intuition or being intuitive or listening to your gut feelings it can just happen all the time. It doesn't necessarily have to be deemed that you are now intuitive, because you already are. It's a matter of how you allow that to blossom and how far you want it to blossom. Because some of us, we just only take it so far. That's okay. Doesn't matter. Some of us, we develop it and we use it as a tool to help others or to work with others. And there are different levels of what I call intuition. There's also being able to understand and read body language. And just reading body language is a form of intuition, but it can also be trained and taught. Reading body language can be taught. That's an easy thing. But once you're taught, then as you start to develop the more of your intuitive self, you pick up on the body language quicker, faster, and sometimes you see more of that body language than what you were taught to see. So again, it's layered with many what I call ways of using your intuition so that you can serve others or even help yourself. So I want to go back to saying earlier that we are these energetic beings of light. And by using your intuitive self or your intuitive information or knowledge or just feelings, that's one way that you're starting to express yourself and to allow yourself to let whatever we call your light shine, or to let that come forth and serve others. So let's talk about then, what does it really mean to be intuitive? So from what I understand, from what I've read, I've learned, I've sat in lectures, I've researched, I've looked up, that intuition is simply this ability to know things that you couldn't possibly know about someone or a place or a situation. Instinct is more of us being able to survive. In other words, that's when we talk about instinct, because we do have instincts. Mothers have instincts, especially around children and babies. And that can lead into more of what we call a mother's intuition or mother's gut feeling, but it's also an instinct. And so an instinct was already programmed within us as well to be able to make sure that we know the difference between something that may be good for us or something that may not be good for us. And sometimes you find that instinct and that intuition gets combined. It's like when you have it combined, it's really good because then it's really telling you something. It's like if you were to go to a place and you're feeling it intuitively, maybe I don't want to go here. But then you step inside and then you feel, this doesn't feel safe. Well, that's your instinct. But your intuition is already telling you, maybe this isn't a place I really want to be. But when you put those two together, you walk in that door and you go, okay, I wasn't feeling good about this place, and now that I've walked in, I'm feeling this negative energy. I'm out of here. And that's where you can put those two together, and it can be very effective. And it's also about listening to that intuition as well. So an intuition, again, is a form of vibration. You are vibrating and connecting with energy, and that energy is to a certain extent sending you signals. A lot of people talk about it's like a radio, you know how a radio gets signals and then you can turn the radio on, or the TV, or even our computers. We can't see those signals, but we know they're coming across the waves. And it's the same thing with intuition. It's that we all have little antennas, and that could just be our whole body. And the more we turn that antenna up, the more intuitive information we will get. So if you really think about it, it's a bridge. It's a bridge between your logical mind and your spiritual connection. If you believe that you are spiritually connected, if you believe that there is a greater power, a greater source, and that source is not just within you, but you are it. We are all it. We are all connected. So when it acts as a bridge between these two levels, then that's when it starts to bring us insight. Think about a time that maybe you had a lot of things going on in your mind, you were stressed, you had decisions to make, and you felt like your head was so cluttered. And then you just decided at one point, you just walked outside and maybe you sat on your patio and you just sat down for a minute and you just sat and you closed your eyes and you were just sort of in stillness. And you realized that all these things were rumbling around in your head, but then you just kind of put them aside. And you didn't meditate, but you just sat for a moment and you let your mind rest. And when your mind rests, that's when you start to connect spiritually. And sometimes if you're sitting outside on your patio and you're in nature, you're outside. You're not inside a box that's kind of restricting you. And you feel the maybe the wind, you feel the sun, maybe it's getting ready to rain, you hear the thunder or you hear birds singing. You're connecting. You're connecting to nature. And nature is a magical thing in our lives because it sometimes brings peace and it brings us clarity of thinking. And so that's when you're able to really stop sort of this conscious clutter that's going on. And that's when intuition starts to step up. It'll step up. And sometimes even in your mind, you can ask a question like, why am I so stressed? And guess what? You're going to get an answer. You may not necessarily hear it right away, but you're going to get an answer, and it's going to come. And some people say they hear things. Some people say they just have strong thoughts or they feel things. And that's when the intuitive you is working. And I like to call that inner wisdom because we have an inner wisdom. Actually, we have everything we need to know within us, everything we need to know to do. I mean, think about times that, people have survived really situations that you wouldn't think they would. I remember reading a story about a young girl that was it was a small plane that had crashed, and I think she was about 13 or 14, and she was the only survivor, and she literally survived in the jungle for quite some time. And she was instinctively and intuitively and spiritually guided. There were just things that she ended up doing that protected her. There were things that she even said later in an interview, I didn't know what to do, but I just started listening. I just started following my heart. I just started I just sort of got these messages like, gather these leaves, do this, stay here, look for water. And she was divinely guided. And, even though she did not know how to survive in this environment until she was eventually rescued, but there were things that she did that she just started doing instinctively. And that's when her intuition started to kick in. So there is a role of intuition in what we call spirituality. And that's what I'm talking about. It is a tool to help you connect to your higher self. So when we align with our intuition and we align with the universal energy, that's when everything starts to come together. And it's no longer just a coming together, it's a complete bridge. It's like the pathway to information that we now can connect to. And what happens is that we are able to start differentiating between, this is my mind doing this, and this is my intuition doing this. And I can honestly say that's how I work, because I can work very logically, and then I can go in and work very intuitively, and I can sort of push out and shut off all the logic information. However, the best way I work is when I put the two together, because I don't necessarily believe that we're left brain or right brain. Yeah, I'm left-handed, but I also do things with my right hand. And this is more of a primary. Yeah, it's more of my lead hand, but I do a lot of things with this hand as well. So it doesn't mean that I'm only working out of the right side of my brain. Although I like to say because I'm left-handed, I'm always right, because I'm always in the right side of my brain. But the point is that we do have an ability to bring this more and more together. And scientists have recently, done a lot of studies. They've actually conducted studies on watching the brain as people are making decisions and doing things, and they're starting to see more of where both sides of the brain are working. They're not just coming from a place of logic. They're folding in the intuitive information as well, and then they're able to make better decisions. And I know in business that's a great tool to have because it does help you make better decisions. I might sit down and put together a plan for my business. But then I also might take a lot of those questions that I have about my business, and I might pull up a pendulum and ask questions around this information and see what the pendulum is giving me. Is it giving me insight? Is it answering my yes or no questions? Is it helping me understand that maybe I need to think deeper or plan more? So I'm actually integrating my energy of moving that pendulum, because that is my chi, and also with the logical process of developing a plan. In fact, I've worked with business owners in the past, spiritual business owners, and part of the program was we set forth what we did. We did projections, like what would your revenue be for the next year? And we went through this exercise, and we did all of this kind of mathematically. We chunked it out, we came up with a number, we backed into it, we figured out a weekly amount. And then once we did all of that and had that down on paper, then we sat down and then we did a prosperity grid. And we folded that energy of developing prosperity in your business or in your career. It doesn't have to be a business, it can be a career as well. And then we folded that energy into the planning. And that made it a lot stronger. And they were listening intuitively, like, yeah, I think this is the direction I can go. Yes, I think this can help me. So your intuition, as I said earlier, really does differ from your instinctive energy, but also you want to be able to fold in your logical thinking and your logical mind. Now, what are some signs that you are intuitive? So first, you just kind of have this inner knowing about certain things. It could be anything. And you could have a certain knowing about certain things in one area, but then not have any knowing about anything in another area. It's like sometimes just knowing, like, well, I really feel like that this is going to happen and maybe I should stay away from it. Or I feel like that, I should really step forward and do something different in my life. In fact, sometimes that's how we make decisions. We're feeling this desire to connect with something. So you'll have all these signs. You'll have this inner knowing. And also, you might know things that you wouldn't necessarily know unless someone told you. And then sometimes that scares people. Sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, I had these thoughts about someone or about something that was going to happen or that's something I wanted to share with them. And then I finally shared it with them and they were like, oh my gosh, that really was happening. Or, oh yeah, I had this situation. How'd you know that? And then you're sort of like freaked out sometimes too. You go, I don't know how I knew it. And I think that's probably in all my years of working intuitively, and it's been 30 plus years, I still, like a kid, go, how do I do this? How do I know these things? How do I know that person's name? How do I know that someone in their family is going to have, an opportunity? How do I know that? And even though I've gone through a lot of the exercises and I do listen completely to the information that comes through, but I still ask myself that because I stay in a space of always wanting to learn, of always wanting to know, how does this happen? But then there's that part of me that says, okay, I'm not even going to question it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And that's sometimes where, like, if many of you are dealing with awakening your intuition, then then the conscious mind is going to start saying, uh-oh, no, you need to question this. No, this may not be right, because we get in our minds sometimes that we have to be right about things. And if we're not right, then we've made a mistake and people might judge us and those kind of things. And I let that go a long time ago when I started working with people. And I tell people right up front, I may not be right. I may not always get the interpretation correct. And the reason I say that is because I always go with my feeling. The feeling is always true. The interpretation of the feeling may not be exactly correct. So that's one thing that I want you all to know, that you might say, oh, I was really thinking this about a situation, but then that really didn't happen, so I guess I was wrong. No, your feeling was right. You perhaps just didn't have the expansion or the experience to interpret that correctly. And I can give you an example. And I had a friend once that I'd known her for many years. She was a business friend. And I knew that when she had remarried, that she married someone and they'd made a decision not to have children. And they were just, nope, we've decided we're not going to have children. We both have been married before. We have children from those previous relationships. And so we're just not going to have children. So about 6 years later, she called me one day and she actually said, oh, can we have lunch? I want to talk to you about something. And she goes, it's really important. And so I was like, okay, yeah. So as I was getting ready to go to the lunch, I started getting all this energy around about her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel baby energy. I feel baby energy. And I'm like, oh, wow, maybe she really does want to have a child and she wants to ask me about this. So we get to lunch. And the first thing I say to her before she even starts, I went, are you thinking about maybe you really do want to have a baby? And she goes, well, yes and no. And she said, it's not me, it's my stepdaughter. And my stepdaughter is trying very hard to get pregnant. And we want a grandchild. We want a grandchild. And so I knew immediately, oh, my feelings were correct, but my interpretation was off. So I want you to think that if you're thinking intuitively, and then it doesn't really come forth like you think, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that your energy is correct. But once I had that experience with her, I realized, wow, I need to be more connected to what that feeling is and then how I interpret that. And so, ask yourself sometimes, like, well, I'm feeling this, but how would I interpret this? So that's why it's really important from time to time to just kind of check yourself and practice. To me, that was the biggest piece. Another step of knowing how you're intuitive is you have these gut feelings. Like, how many of you have had gut feelings? Like, it's just something, like, just on the spur of the moment. Like, okay, I shouldn't go this way. I shouldn't drive this way today. And you find out the roads are all blocked because there was something going on, and it was going to take you an hour longer to get to work than what it would have. That's a gut feeling. Another gut feeling is, like I talked about, mothers' instincts and their gut feelings. They know the difference between a child's cry. They know a hurt cry, a hungry cry, and just I'm a frustrated baby cry. And a mother knows that. They can hear that, but they can feel that as well. That's a gut instinct. That's their instinct toward their child. And fathers can feel that too. It's not just mothers, but mothers are programmed to feel that. So what you want to be able to do is to understand how you're connecting to this energy. And then the next important step is to recognize that you may be what we call empathic. And empathic has different levels of connection. So what happens with being an empath is that you're highly sensitive to others' energies. And I want to say that again. You're highly sensitive to others' energies, and it has levels. And people that are extremely empathic, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes have an inability to shut out the noise. Because when you're an empath, you kind of hear a lot, you're connecting, you're feeling, you're sensing a lot of things. Now, you can take that energy and you can train yourself and direct it and use it, whether you use it for yourself or whether you use it to help or work with others. There are a lot of doctors that are what we call empathic, and that they kind of sense things about people and or their patients before they really know scientifically if that's correct. And it's up to them whether they choose to step into that. You have business owners that can be very empathic with their staff. They can feel a lot of things. They just know. They know that things are going on. I mean, I have to say that, and I use empathy as a word, not so much intuition. I use empathy because empathy is you're feeling the energy of the other people. Have you ever cried in a movie? Okay, it's not real, right? The movie's not real, but you're crying. You know why? You're empathic. You're feeling the pain of that person in the movie. You're feeling, I think one of the hardest movies for me was, there was the one, I can't even remember the name of it, but it was the one with Deborah Winger, and she had cancer, and she was going through a very difficult battle, and her mother was with her all the time, and she was in the hospital, and the nurses were just a little too rigid about when they would give her pain medication. And I remember that it was Shirley MacLaine that played her mother, and her mother was like screaming and screaming at the nurses like, you know, it is 1 o'clock and she needs her medication, because her mother could feel that her daughter was going through this pain. And I remember watching that movie, and I was just crying and crying because I was like, wow, even though that hasn't happened to me, but I could relate to that situation. And so a lot of times that's why we cry in movies, is because we're actually feeling the energy of what's going on. And there are times when, even in my own work, when I'm working with someone and then I can feel the energy of someone near them, that's being an empath. I'm feeling that person's energy. And a lot of times I will share what I'm feeling. And then I'll ask a question, you know, is that what's going on with this person? So being an empath is hard sometimes. And a lot of people that are very, very empathic and they don't know how to control it, sometimes it takes them down the wrong path because they're trying to numb their feelings. And that is, when you have heightened sensitivity, your goal is to learn how to channel that energy in a way that it's going to serve you and how it would serve others. Another way to know that you're really that you're developing your intuition, because again, remember, we're all intuitive, is that you start to have synchronicities. Is that situations that just show up that are just strange, like somebody mentions a book to you 3 times over a week. It's like, oh yeah, I read this book, it was really good. And you're like, oh, I've heard about that book. And then, 2 or 3 days later, you're talking to someone and they said, have you read this book? It just keeps coming up. That's called synchronicity. We say sometimes there are no coincidences. And what we're really saying is that when something comes up multiple times, it might be a message to you, sort of an indirect message. And I know that if I do hear something 3 times, I pay attention to it. I step into it. And I know a lot of times I've heard, it's funny here, even in this business, in my shop, I've had people say to me, do you know so-and-so? And I'm like, no, I don't know that person. And then somebody else will come in and go, do you know this person? And I'm like, no, because that person is maybe a professional somewhere. And then after the 3rd time that I heard someone talk about this person and then say to me, well, you probably know them, right? And I'm like, no, I don't. But you know what? I'm going to pick up the phone and call that person because I think I'm supposed to have a connection with that person. I don't know what it is, but right now this has come to me 3 times. So that means I probably should take some action. So that's kind of my rule that I would sort of give to all of you. If something comes up 3 times in, say, a span of a month or so, pay attention to it or take action, because it probably does mean something. And, a lot of people, I think what's fun, and I call them breadcrumbs, sometimes you kind of get led to something, and it's a little breadcrumb that takes you here and takes you there, and then the next thing you know, you're at the whole loaf of bread all of a sudden. It's like, whoa, it brought me to this situation. So it's about pay attention to the little things. It's just like energy. It's little energy that grows and becomes big energy. So it's the same way with intuition. It's little things that come up, just little things, and they start to add up and become big things. So have you ever found yourself like, wow, I just saw a license plate from the same state, like from Washington State here in Atlanta, just in the last 2 days. What does that mean? You know, and you can ask yourself, what does that mean? Should I look into is there something about Washington State? Because, I mean, it'd be odd to have cars here that's so far away. I mean, I've even seen cars here from Alaska, and I'm like, or from Hawaii, and I'm like, how'd they get here? How'd they get here from Hawaii? You know, obviously their car was put on a boat and they were sent here, but isn't that odd? So it's, you know, pay attention to the little things, the little signs. And then we talked about empathy, and empathy is extremely important, and it's probably, you probably feel empathy for others before you even start feeling some of these other things, because we grow up being empathetic. And unless you are a 100% narcissist, you really don't have the ability to be empathetic with others, because you have no sympathy feelings for others. And that's a whole nother subject. But there are people that don't have empathy for others. So, you know, ask yourself, how does this come to me? So how does your intuition come? Do you hear something? Do you have strong thoughts? Do you feel something? Like, do you have what we call gut feeling? All of a sudden you feel something in your stomach, in your solar plexus. It's like, I'm feeling this. I don't even know where it comes from, but I'm feeling it. Some people can see things, and sometimes it comes like you have symbols that like all of a sudden you see a big square, and you're like, what does that square mean? And again, you have to interpret it. But some people do see things. And then some people taste things. They start tasting things like, why am I tasting bananas all the time? And I've noticed, why do I taste bananas every time this situation comes up? Or why am I smelling roses? All of a sudden I'm smelling roses. Maybe there's a loved one that's passed, that's their energy is near you. And intuitively, you're possibly connecting. So there's different ways of using your intuition. In fact, there's 11 different ways. And they call them the clairessence, clairaudience, clear sensitivity, those kinds of things. And if you really dug into those, you would find that you probably have an ability for at least one of those that you're aware of. The other piece that some people have is dreams. They dream about something, and then they're like, wow, I dreamed about this in my dream. Do you know what it means? Or I dreamed that I was going to get a raise, and then you get it. And that's a lot of times that's where your conscious mind is allowing your subconscious mind to work in your dreams. And so, sometimes people have visions. They just all of a sudden have this vision of how they think something is going to happen. Like, I have this vision of where I'm going to be in 2 years. And you keep thinking about that. And sometimes that's the first step to you being able to align with your energy and manifest that and call that in and bring that. People talk about the law of attraction, but the law of attraction is really about learning how to align your energy with a perceived desire or something, and then to bring that, to allow the universe to provide that to you. And so that happens a lot in visions, where you have a vision of, I see myself in this job in the future, or I see myself living in Arizona, and I don't even know why, but I just feel that. I see myself living there. And then the next thing you know, a year later, you get transferred to Arizona. Or you meet someone and they're from Arizona and you move there. So we do have visions at times. Another way is that how can you strengthen your intuition? You can do that through nature. That's a great way, is to just take a walk, go spend time in nature. Sometimes just being what I call amazed by nature. I remember many years ago, I used to spend a lot of time in Hawaii. Hawaii was one of my favorite places to go. And I would go at least once a year, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. And I would go to Maui, and I loved the Haleakala Mountain, which was a dormant volcano. And you can hike in that volcano. At the top, it's about 10,000 feet, but you can hike down into the volcano, and you can actually camp and stay overnight there. And then within the volcano, there's the flat surface, and then there's a rainforest on one end of it, and then there's what they call sliding trails as you go down. And it's just really a very peaceful place, even though it's dead and it's dormant. So I decided that I wanted to hike into there and stay a couple of nights. And I kept thinking like, oh, I'm going to have this great spiritual experience. And in my mind, I kind of had an idea of what's going to happen. I'll have this. But in the long run, it was not the spiritual experience that I thought I would have. First, it took a day, half a day, just to walk down the sliding trails, and then you had to walk across. It was 9 miles. You had to walk across the base of the volcano for 9 miles. And then that was to the rainforest where you could camp. There was only 2 places where you could actually camp. And they did have, I think, 1 cabin there, but that cabin was, you could only stay in the cabin. They had lotteries, and if you won the lottery, then you could stay in the cabin. But it was grueling for me. It was hot. It was cold, but it was hot. It was miserable. When I got to the rainforest, it was raining, trying to get our tent up. It was like I was soaking wet, and I had a little tiny tent, and it was just everything about it was like, this is not a spiritual experience. And then the next day, in order to walk across the volcano to the other camping place, it was a narrow little trail, and you were required to stay on that trail. You could not get off because there were all kinds of eco things and plants and things that you didn't want to disturb. And I remember walking on that trail, and it was hot, and I was, I had a 50-pound backpack, and we didn't have a lot of food. We just took in a lot of high protein and things. But I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was miserable, I was getting sunburned. My hands got very sunburned from holding my backpack as I walked. And I remember I started crying, and I was like, just crying. And my husband was with me, and he's like, just put one foot in front of the other. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I just kept doing that. And we finally got to the camp place. We were able to set up our tent. And then that night, all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, it was like I woke up, and it was like someone had a flashlight, and they were over the tent. And I was like, oh, no, someone's here. And I slowly unzipped the tent. And when I did, I looked up, and it was a full moon. It was the most beautiful full moon I'd ever seen, and the entire Milky Way. And I can't describe the Milky Way to you unless you've actually seen it where there's no light pollution. And I remember reaching up to see if I could touch the Milky Way. That's how close it felt. And in that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I feel so close to like this universal oneness, this greater power, this God. What is this? But I felt in that moment this huge, just awakening. And I realized in that moment, that was my spiritual experience. And I've never forgotten that. And I've never forgotten what the Milky Way looked like that night, because you can see the Milky Way when you're in Hawaii, always. However, we were 10,000 closer to it, 10,000 feet closer to it, and it was amazing. So there are times when you will have a spiritual experience that will give you a different perspective, and it did. I had a very different perspective about nature after that. And I realized how vast our universe was. So, what are some ways that you could open up your intuition? One, just sit in stillness, listen, and just listen. Just see if things come. Sometimes maybe they won't, or sometimes you're just blocking it. But the more you practice, the more it comes up. Also, pay attention to patterns. Like, pay attention to things that are happening around you, and sometimes you're getting messages from the universe, but you're just ignoring them, or you're not believing in them. And then also use spiritual tools. A lot of people, since the pandemic, really began to step into their spiritual connection, and many of them started with stones and crystals. And why do people start with stones and crystals? You know, I did a lot of thinking about that. And I realized over the time with even research and working with stones and crystals myself, stones and crystals are literally minerals of the universe or of the earth. And they have a vibration because they're a mineral. And our bodies need minerals. And so there's a vibrational connection between that stone and our body. And sometimes that stone, if you feel like it's calling out to you, is literally kind of giving you a message of, you need this. You need this energy. And it may not mean that you need to take that as a mineral, because believe it, I mean, our stones and crystals are also used in medicines and all kinds of things. You know, it's like you have lithium, and lepidolite is lithium, and lithium is used in medications. You have bismuth. Bismuth is Pepto-Bismol. That's where it's made from. So our stones and crystals are used in many, many ways. And they're used, you know, think about diamonds. Diamonds are used on drills. They're used in different sanding procedures because they're the strongest, one of the strongest stones in the universe. So spiritual tools can definitely help you. Some of those are journaling, just burning incense sometimes, just sitting with the aroma of incense and just being quiet. Walking in nature. Sometimes lighting a candle, playing a Tibetan bowl, meditation. You know, making your own tinctures, teas that relax you, teas that give you energy, teas that help you, herbs that help you. There's all kinds of ways to begin to wake up that intuitive self. And then the last piece of waking up your intuition is surrounding yourself with people that think and that are like-minded, like you as well. Because we all know that in this, what we call spiritual awakening, and I mean spiritual that's not connected to religious doctrine. Spiritual awakening means that you're creating your own connection to your own power source. And you want to be connected to others who think similarly, because there's a lot of people out there that don't think like you do, and they want to judge, or they want to say, oh, you're crazy. You know, why are you thinking that? And I usually say to people, if they say that to me, well, how do I know you're not crazy? You know, just because you say it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. And just because you think that I shouldn't think like you doesn't mean that I'm wrong. This goes two ways. And many people who step into the spiritual self are hesitant because they're concerned about judgment, or they're concerned about family not supporting them. And the reality is that if you're starting this journey into awakening your spiritual self, that's being the true authentic you. And many people around you are not living in their authentic self. And you want to be able to be around more people that want to be more authentic. And that's really what being and growing and developing your intuition is, learning who you are and where is your authentic self. And sometimes that's a hard question to answer. What is my authentic self? But it's not too late ever to start working on that and to start even putting down on paper, this is who I am. You know, this is who I was, and this is who I am, and this is who I want to be. And if you can start to answer that question, your intuition will thrive. Your intuition will grow faster than you ever imagined because you'll start to get information. And the goal is to learn how to manage it. And the last piece around intuition is you have to trust it and you have to have faith that this information that's coming is here to guide you in a positive way. That it's here to bring you into a positive part of your life. And that's what it's all about. So thank you for being here today. And like I said, we're all light beings. I hope that as you're able to go out into the world and into your day each week, that you're tapping into your intuitive self.